Welcome to the last session of NACW. Congratulations, you made it. We are here. Everyone is still awake, which is good. I hope that you all stay that way throughout this session. That's the goal. Thank you so much. I am Amy Kessler. I'm the Director of Latin America at the Climate Action Reserve. It is a great pleasure to be here with you all in this amazing panel. Obviously, we've heard a lot about the challenges in the market and promising and innovative solutions throughout this conference. And we just decided to leave the hardest, most challenging areas for the very last session because why not? It's fun that way. So again, thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I'm gonna let them each just describe a bit for a moment who they are, what they do, what their organizations do, and yeah, please take it over, Lauren.
Thanks, Amy. So for those of you who don't know ClimeCo, look at the various everywhere. So we're a sponsor here, so you've probably seen the logo, but if you haven't heard about us, ClimeCo is a carbon offset project developer. We sell the offsets, and we also provide ESG advisory services. Been in the space, ClimeCo has been in the space for a long time now, since around 2009, so very experienced. And I think what's so interesting about ClimeCo when we talk about hard to abate is that the bread and butter and kind of core of ClimeCo has been engaging with these heavy industrial and hard to abate sectors since the beginning. So our CEO, Bill Fletterbach, started some of the initial fertilizer N2O abatement work throughout North America, piloted those project types to reduce N2O emissions, and that became the foundation of ClimeCo all the way back in 2009. And since that time, ClimeCo has grown tremendously, both in people, the number of folks that are working at ClimeCo, but also the sectors that we serve. But hard to abate's always been at the core. So I personally am the Senior Director of Asset Innovations, and that means helping enable these markets through methodology development, investment, contracting, and partnerships to bring new projects to life. So we work in a variety of sectors in this heavy industry, hard to abate sector, both geographically and type of project. So very excited to talk about this today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. Nathalie, if you'd like to also just for a moment present who you are and where you come from in your organization.
Okay. I'm Nathalie Flores. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Nathalie Flores. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I hold various roles. So I'm going to focus on the representation that I'm doing here, which is Sustainability Coordinator of the British Chamber of Commerce in the Dominican Republic. I'm here because most of the businesses of the Dominican Republic, I mean the main companies, as I mentioned in a previous panel, are part of this nonprofit organization to scale up the way in which they can transform their operations from social corporate responsibility to actually a real sustainability engagement. I also hold a governmental position in the Dominican Republic, though I'm not in that capacity here, but I think it's important to mention in case we can talk later. I'm the Director for Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation at the Department of Environment of the Dominican Republic, which we call Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. So I think I can leave it there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nathalie. Edwin?
Great. Thank you. I'm Edwin Makkinga. I'm the Manager of Climate Policy at Enbridge, Inc., based in Calgary. So I oversee climate policy across North America and then a little bit internationally as well. So if you're not familiar, Enbridge is one of North America's leading energy delivery companies. So we have pipeline infrastructure, transportation infrastructure for crude oil, natural gas. We also have one of North America's largest gas utilities in Ontario and Quebec, and growing portfolio of renewable assets in both North America, so solar, wind, some geothermal, hydro, run-of-river, and then also a growing portfolio in Europe as well, so offshore of France, UK, Germany. And then also looking at making investments in hydrogen and CCUS. So one of the pilot projects that we've got currently is actually one of our utility in Ontario. So we're producing green hydrogen and blending it with conventional natural gas to about 5,000 customers there, so a small subset to kind of offset some of their the conventional natural gas use.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I think with this panel, I think the real question is, why am I here? I don't know. Just going to guide this conversation here. Lauren, so as you said, really hard to abate is at the core of ClimeCo and always has from its foundations. Really, ClimeCo has been an innovator in many ways. Can you touch on some of the specific sectors and project types you think are the most challenging, the most hard to abate, and really what ClimeCo is doing to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you look at the pie chart of the emissions that we need to address in the United States and abroad, you see some pretty obvious trends. So you'll see the energy sector, which we have Edwin here, and I'll let him chat with that quite a bit, because that's easily one of the more difficult sectors. But then as you look around, you see transportation, and there's a lot of different innovation happening in the transportation section. But then a big piece of the pie, a huge piece of the pie that we don't see a lot of people addressing today is industrial. And a lot of these facilities that we work with have huge challenges in abatement. So one of the project types we're working on right now is cement, and we're working with the Climate Action Reserve on that. And cement's in a difficult place. They have incredibly high emissions through calcination, which is a direct process emission. It's not burning fossil fuel. It's a chemical reaction that creates CO2. And they also use loads of energy. And so cement's interesting because there's two ways really to change it. Is you can capture that CO2, which is tremendously expensive, and I think CCUS has its place and one of the sectors we're working in. But you can also replace it with alternative products. And these products exist, some of them have existed for a long time, but they might not have the legacy, strength, durability, acceptance in the market. So they do perform well, but when we talk about infrastructure, you want something reliable and you want something that you understand. So helping provide incentives to that sector, I think, is tremendously important, because you can transition the industry, but we can't not have cement. Some other work that we do is in the fertilizer sector. So there's a lot of ways to abate N2O, but a lot of facilities are not doing so. They can install equipment, but there's no incentives, and we've been working with the Climate Action Reserve on that for a long time. And then finally, I will touch on CCUS, because that is a really important technology that's going to support hydrogen, again, like I said, cement, all of these different types of energy assets that we need to decarbonize, but we don't have a pathway today. So that's some of the sectors that we're really excited about addressing.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lauren. I am going to just ask you one quick follow-up question on that. So I'm curious, and perhaps this is a selfish question from the registry, of course, that I'm representing.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if you could touch on a bit more what, from the registry perspective, we can do to help tackle those sectors with you. As you talked about, we are working collaboratively with you on a lot of these hard-to-abate areas. What can we do from our processes and protocol development to really do that and scale that in those hard-to-abate sectors?
So finalize our methodology, please.
Holly, is that?
That's not, where's Mackenzie? No, I think helping us enable and get those incentives, but also touting the value of these projects. So we were talking about it earlier in this week. We also have a really robust nature-based solutions team, and we love our nature-based solutions products, but I think helping support the narrative that these other types of products that support these hard to abate sectors, support these vital sectors, they're still important and they deserve to be recognized as super high quality projects. So I think continuing to allow us to create carbon offsets, even in some of these sectors that might not be as pretty and might also be more maligned by the environmental industry and or the environmental nonprofits in some cases is super important, and also driving demand. And the reserve's been great about that, so.
Thank you. I did pay you to say that.
Yeah.
Natalie, I'm going to switch over to you. This is a bit of a different perspective, jumping from sort of the technology side of things to really the geographic challenges in hard-to-abate areas. So could you touch upon a bit those particular challenges we see in emerging economies and how the carbon market can work to support that?
Yeah, I have some experience, of course, in emerging economies because I'm from Latin America, but I'm from the Dominican Republic, which is, as I mentioned in another session, it's though it's the second largest island in the Caribbean, it's a small country in terms of its economy and everything. And that translates in the education that both the citizens of the Dominican Republic and the private sector of the Dominican Republic has in these topics. So we specifically are considered as medium rent income country. So we are not as close as to a real emerging economy, but we are not as we were like around 15 years ago, meaning that our economy has been growing. So we are identified as such by all the markets. In our case, I think, and by our case, I also relate with Central American countries, because our country is part of the Central American integration system, and we have very similar trend in the way in which we've been developed at our country. And sometimes people think that we are more related to Caribbean islands because we are a Caribbean island, but actually we are more related to Central America due to like this group of countries that try to develop together. So in our case, most of the challenge are related to how you make understand the private sector that it is important for them to do this type of investment. And the first thing that you have to do is to explain to them why this problem is such emergency that they need to switch. And you might think, like, by you, I say all of you, and of course, because it's something that I thought before getting into this world, you may think that it's easy, like if you have a problem, and you have the solution, you need to solve it. But in this case, when you have a long-term like catastrophe, because we are talking of 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, the world will collapse. Like, why do they have to invest now? So probably that's part of the challenging of making them understand they should change their investment matrix and their operations, which is probably the most important thing to face climate change. But then it's interesting that you mentioned the cement companies in general. For example, the cement companies in the Dominican Republic specifically are very aware of the issue. So they have a group of enterprises, non-profit, that is called ADOCEM in Spanish, which is the Association of Cement Producers. And they are actually working with the government of the Dominican Republic on doing their inventories. The cement companies need to report their carbon emissions inventories to the National Bank of the Dominican Republic. It's a compromise that they have. And then the bank should report to other ministries that need to report either to the Climate Change Convention or any other report on carbon emissions. But actually, this association is working on the tiers that the convention has for emission reporting to change their operations. And since they are still, educating the members of the association on why it's important to invest in building robust inventories, they are training the people working on those reports how they can make these reports, like changing tiers. Like when they change a tier of reporting and the way they are doing the inventories, it's like a point for them. So from that, the Cement Association now launched a decarbonization roadmap for the whole region, and also one specific for the Dominican Republic, which they hand to the government 2 years ago. And they are offsetting. But why they are offsetting at this point? because we don't have a voluntary, like we as a country, not governmental or private sector, we don't have an actual market. I have mentioned that before. Even though we have the enabling environment to put a market into place, we are still working on green taxonomy, climate finance architecture, and other things that we, like housekeeping, that the country needs to put together before going beyond that. But they are actually, like the cement associations are actually offsetting. And they, for example, for the Latin American and the Caribbean Climate Week in July, they offsetted the whole Climate Week emissions. And they did it with the tiering that they have on their reporting and the work that they are doing with us. And they gave to the government, look, this is like what we offsetted, this is the investment, this is the displacement of the waste. They took the waste, they put it in their incineration, like the waste of the actual Climate Week. So when you have that level of awareness, things change. So that's why I'm telling you, like, when I'm in this in the coordination of the sustainability committee of these enterprises that I mentioned before within the British Chamber of Commerce of the Dominican Republic, then I think if everybody that has production operations, either from agriculture, from industry, or any other operation, industrial specifically, if everybody will be doing something like this, then we will be where we have to be. So I think we can live it in raising awareness and giving the enabling environment when the government prepares their legal framework to help businesses on the investment that they have to do to switch, also that. And I think setting real, robust but achievable rules in terms of the compromises they need to do. Like, help them go beyond social corporate responsibility, but at the same time give them, like, tools to do the investment that they can switch. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nathalie. And going back to one of the first things you said, talking about how you get the private sector to understand the importance of making these investments, I think that's a really great bridge to hand it over to Edwin here. Enbridge has been investing in renewable energy for many years, of course, and continues to diversify its investments, as you spoke about. How does a company like Enbridge view the role of carbon when thinking about investing in hard-to-abate sectors and really innovative technologies? And, of course, the challenges you face in that.
Sure. I don't know if I can just go off on a tangent, if that's
Go
okay.
for it. Run with it.
Actually, we're a pretty small group here, and I think everyone was like totally enthralled with what you were saying. But no, seriously. But I was there over Christmas, like in Puerto Plata for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for like a family vacation or whatever. And
It's just a good place.
No, totally. But the one thing that struck me there was just like the overwhelming need for investment in infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. Just like thinking about it from a climate perspective. And I know, like, the one day, sorry, I was like emotional, but no, like, and then one day we were swimming and there was just like so much plastic, right? And it just blew my mind. Like, yeah. I thought plastic was like a Southeast Asia issue. No. But I mean, like, we spent, I don't know, like 15 minutes or so, or 20 minutes. I got a post on LinkedIn, but like cleaning up plastic, right? And then there was a bunch of people, like, you know, sweeping up the beach and whatever, so we were like helping them. But like, it was just so overwhelming that we just like, what are you gonna do, right? And then coming out of there, like, it's such a beautiful place, right? It's like, well, what can I, as an individual living in North America, like, what can I do to support that, right? And then I noticed, like, you know, there's like, what do you call it, like a renewable, like, there's a wind farm, right? Nearby.
Various,
yeah, that's right, which was great. And it's like, but how do, like, not even Enbridge, but like, sorry, I'll go off on a tangent again, but like, how do we as individuals, like, how do we support development in that country, like maybe on an individual level or something, right? Sorry, I can talk about Enbridge if you want to, but
No, okay, yeah.
no, like, but no, like, I think.
And then I'm here, like, I cannot say anything, and I want to answer, so.
Oh, go for it.
But no, I mean, the whole theme of the conference is action, right? And I mean, Enbridge is doing a lot, right? But like, what can we, like, but I feel like developing nations is like where we need to focus, right? So I don't know, I would be happy if you talked about that. I mean, I can talk about Enbridge, but.
You want me to talk about it?
Yeah, please. Nathalie. Well, I guess I would pose the question
Sorry,
even
you're the
more.
moderator.
No, this is fantastic. I would pose the question even more so is, well, is it an individual thing, or is it obviously in order to achieve real climate action, of course, we
Yeah.
need scale.
Right.
And how do we achieve that is through the carbon market.
Right.
So the carbon market enables these needed funds in the regions specifically that need it most in the developing countries. I think that's the critical piece, is how we as the carbon market can channel those funds into those needed areas. And I think obviously Nathalie can speak about how, from the country perspective,
Yeah.
you then can also say, well, this is where we really need those funds. These are the sectors that are most urgent in my area. So I would love Nathalie to respond to that, but I was
Okay.
just, yeah.
Okay, I will.
I can answer your question.
I will try, because now I'm thinking of Puerto Plata. No, but just to give a little context, Puerto Plata is a province in the north center of the Dominican Republic. It used to be the Punta Cana of the 80s, 70s, so it bloomed at its time.
Yeah.
Then then the country has the development of the southeast area, which is La Romana, Punta Cana, and Bávaro. That is the most famous part of the Dominican Republic in terms of tourism. And now, by initiative of the current government, which is in office for almost 3 years now, they decided to give back to Puerto Plata what Puerto Plata was before, you know. So now that's why they are, they do the port over there. They are trying to create a new Vin Diesel studio for movies in the area. Also, another investment that has to do with something, of course, not like that, but like the Puerto Plata Valley, something like for technology thinkers and scientists and everything. So the president, and this is not government talk, but the president has very keen on helping Puerto Plata to get that bloom back. But as you said, since it was forgotten for years now, it has a lot of what you mentioned, and it's not only a problem that we have in Puerto Plata with plastic specifically and waste. It's something of the whole country, and that's why 2 years and a half ago, the Congress passed a new law of waste management in the Dominican Republic that for the past 2 years and a half passes all the constituency for waste management that was all over the place before, because it was in the municipalities, and then it was in the central government, and then it went back to private sector projects. It was a mess. So now the Ministry of Environment has the mandate to put together a new directorate, that is the Waste Management Directorate, and it's putting into place everything that the law demands on waste management. But it's a big problem, not only from our country, but also from other countries like ours that are small, that are islands, and in which we need to do a lot of investment in education. So trying to extrapolate it a little bit to our topic here, which is offsets and carbon markets, I want to give the example. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but I want to give the example of REDD+. So we have an ERPA with the World Bank, with the FCPF from the World Bank, in which in 6 years of preparation, readiness funds, like around $6 million of readiness funds from the FCPF, we identified from specific areas like the issue that you saw in Puerto Plata, but related to the forest. We identified how we can protect the forest, because we need the water. Like without water, we are an island. Without water, we cannot live. And how we were going to build the capacity for the community to understand that when they protect the forest, they protect the water, and they protect the carbon. and they can have co-benefits from the implementation of a project in which they shouldn't cut the forest, because that's the main issue. One of our main drivers of deforestation is the leakages to cut the forest and send the charcoal to Haiti, illegal, of course, and also for agriculture. So we had that issue. So we needed to develop a way in which the community understood that they could have cacao. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, but cacao, the chocolate. They could produce coffee. They could produce macadamia, and they could also use, with management plans, they could use some wood from that forest that is in the RED Plus scheme. So I could spend the whole day talking about RED Plus, but I'm gonna leave it there because it's 10 years, 15 years of raising awareness and making the community understand why it's important not to cut. And of course, when the funds came, making them part of even the reference level. Like when the people go to measure the carbon with everything, they go with them. They're like, okay, we have the carbon, right? Like it's not going away. So that awareness, I think it's the most important thing, which we are trying to do in other parts that we want to develop for tourism, like the case of Puerto Plata, which is developed already but needs a refurbish. Is that the word? Yeah. And another part that is called Miches, that they have a very small river bank, but they need water they need water to supply a whole new Punta Cana that is going to be built over there.
Yeah.
But without the forest, you don't have the water. And then with their waste, they are drying the mangroves. And with their waste, they are also erosioning the beach. So it's very complex, because the most important thing is to make people understand that they have to change their behavior, and how their behavior change can give them a new way of living, right? Through waste, to selling the waste, to recycling or whatever, and protecting the environment. Because, for example, in Miches specifically, which is another area, as I said before, the totals, Tortuga Tinglar turtle. Have you heard of the Tinglar? It's a huge turtle from the Caribbean that goes to the Dominican Republic to put their eggs every year.
Yeah.
Like the hump whales and everything. And it's in that area.
Yeah.
So imagine the waste affecting the turtles.
Yeah.
And that's why raising awareness and making them part of the whole awareness process of learning, And carbon markets money help us achieve that. And that's why I mentioned RED.
Absolutely. No, I think there's such overlap through all these different pieces. And I think specifically in more challenging geographies, there's even more overlap between these different topics. And Edwin, I am going to toss it back to you, because I do think actually the energy, I think that was fantastic, because I really think that highlights exactly this dynamic we're talking about, how complex this truly can be. And I do think the energy sector specifically, and how you think about where you invest in renewable energy and how you go about that, if you're thinking about these things, I think it'd be great to talk about, when you think about building that in a geography or where you're doing that, how you take that into consideration.
Sure. Yeah. So I thought about the question and really breaking it down into technology challenges and geographic challenges. So really, when we think about at least ourselves investing in like low energy sources or like innovation, like CCUS, for example, or hydrogen, I think one of the key issues that we have is really that high barrier to entry based on finance like from both a capital expense perspective as well as the operational expense perspective. And then also the whole notion of economies of scale. And you kind of talked a little bit about cement, right? And I think it's the whole notion of when we see a lot of policies coming out, I think they create incentives to provide supply, but there's really not that demand side. So when we think about cement, for example, with low embedded carbon, are there customers who are willing to pay a premium for that particular product, right? And I think that is a major kind of roadblock in terms of getting a lot of these projects to scale, whether it's cement or green hydrogen, for example. Like, you know, everybody wants hydrogen, but do you want to pay a premium for green hydrogen, for example? Like, I think, you know, versus, you know, blue or green or gray, right? So I think that's a big one as well. And then research and development. So I think that's another one is really tied to, are there standards in place for blending of hydrogen with natural gas, for example, or are there standards in place for transporting CO2 or hydrogen within pipelines, for example? So I think those are all kind of like technological barriers. And then just thinking about it from a geographic perspective, I think public policy is another big thing that we look at. So when we think about the IRA, for example, in the US versus Canada, where I'm based, so really there's two structures there in terms of incentivizing investment into low carbon, for example. In the US, we've got investment tax credits and we've got production tax credits, which is basically a guaranteed revenue based on, you know, your CapEx or your capital investment and your operational expense. In Canada, we basically have a carbon pricing system where you generate basically carbon offsets through the compliance market. So the unfortunate piece about the compliance market is that there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty and policy uncertainty and price uncertainty related to it. So as an investor, one of the big questions you ask is like, where can I get a guaranteed income, right? In terms of like subsidizing the investment that I want to make. And that's created a, you know, I guess a lot of capital flight, which maybe you didn't hear about it so much in the US, but certainly in Canada and Europe, who are kind of, not to say suffering, but like, you know, we're trying to compete with the US, obviously, in terms of like this fixed ITC, PCT structure. So I think those are kind of the things that we really think about. Do you want to keep going? Yeah.
Well, I mean, are you done? I don't know.
No,
Do you have anything else
and those are
interesting
really
to say?
No, those are the key challenges, right?
Yeah,
But I mean,
yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Could I actually comment briefly?
please.
Yeah, I would like to just emphasize what you've said about the green premium, because I think,
Oh, yeah, it's huge.
yeah, one of
Yeah.
the things that we've seen in the market is this trend of, you know, decarbonize yourself, don't worry about carbon offsets, just do it within your supply chain. And if we could, I think we should, right? That obviously the first thing you should do is reduce your own emissions, and offsets happen after that. But right now, the way most of these, you know, businesses are structured, the product gets sold multiple times over, it's processed differently. Tracking that green premium up to the person that's actually willing to pay for it, which is the, you know, the public high-profile company with shareholder pressure and, you know, a big green logo on their LinkedIn page, right? That path is not simple, and getting that premium up through that path is not happening today. So I think, you know, when we talk about carbon markets, I know in Canada it's a little more simple, honestly, because you have a
More simple?
well, as somebody who's worked in Canada policy,
Yeah.
I do take that back. But at least
No,
there's the price signal is
Yes.
clearer,
Yeah,
right?
totally is.
So,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of sectors where that price signal is very unclear and very difficult to trace today, and probably will continue to be difficult to trace for a long time. So the value of the carbon market, the voluntary carbon market, and a compliance market for that green premium, that price signal, I think is essential.
I think that's right. And I think that really does also touch on the challenges, again, in these specific sectors. The chain of ownership is extremely challenging, and I know you're facing that with cement and trying to figure out who actually owns the rights to the carbon, who do we issue the credits to, is extremely challenging in these sorts of sectors. So I think that's really interesting. Lauren, I'm going to go back to you as well.
Sure.
I'm wondering if you can, you know, we focused on with you, ClimeCo's been an amazing champion of so many different innovative solutions, specifically on technology side, but also now you're kind of diving into new geographies. So I think we're, you know, bridging the gap here. Wondering if you could talk a bit about that unique experience with China adipic acid specifically, or how ClimeCo more largely is thinking about supporting these new solutions in different geographies.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are working on a process to expand our adipic acid protocol into China, which is one of the largest adipic acid markets in the world. Those who have been in the market long enough might kind of flinch a little bit when you hear China adipic acid, because there were some interesting market dynamics a long time ago, but we're working on a protocol that's going to largely correct those, and we actually think it's going to be super high integrity. And the reason why we want to look internationally is, well, it's kind of simple. The climate doesn't care, right? And at the end of the day, if you're only focusing on the U.S. and these kind of very familiar projects, you're going to cause carbon leakage because folks are going to feel regulated. They're going to go operate in somewhere that's cheaper. So I think including other geographies is super important, and also, depending on the project type, could also have a really significant sustainable development component. And I think also talking about the, maybe not for China Dibic specifically, but I really like the reserve's approach towards jurisdictional protocols, because I think it helps understand the nuance that different geographies operate in. So, renewable energy is not eligible for credits under many programs these days, but there's a lot of countries, particularly island nations, where the idea that renewable is super easy and grid connected and supporting everything at low cost is not true at all, right? So I think taking a more nuanced approach to the jurisdiction level is very important as well for integrity.
I think that's right. For those of you that don't know the Reserve, we really work on developing jurisdiction-specific protocols. So that means when we develop a protocol, we adapt it to the local context, building in the laws and the norms and any specific conditions on the ground that we should consider for additionality, for eligibility, but also for things like social safeguards, environmental safeguards, really building in that context. And we think it's really critical to work with local partners there, such as in Dominican Republic, working with the ministry there, and really having that perspective. We find it to be really critical, and really with these hard debate areas even more so. So I think I appreciate that you brought that up, Lauren. I swear I didn't pay her really, but I really feel like I did. So Dominican Republic, Nathalie, has really done an amazing job of branding itself or becoming just a leader in the climate space in Latin America and even more globally. Last year you had the Carbon Market Forum in the Dominican Republic. I wonder if you could touch on how you've really been able to achieve that global leadership in this space, given all these unique challenges we've discussed here and really highlighted.
Yeah. First of all, the global leadership or regional leadership, it's basically political willingness, because that was a mandate from the president. He said, we're going to become leaders on this, so let's do it. And when you have that backing, then you can do your job with a lot of engagement, because the president sets the policies for foreign affairs, and the environmental law of the Dominican Republic establishes that the Ministry of Environment needs to lead the environmental foreign affairs. So it's a coordination in between the Ministry of Environment and the foreign affairs. But I think that was really important because, and again, I'm just talking as a citizen to make understand, because I don't want to, politicize the thing. But when the president got into his appointment, like the first day, he arrived in an electric car, which was a little shocking, because we have a tendency of using big cars, big gas cars, like the big cars here in the United States. Like, we admire the United States a lot. We depend on the United States as a country. Our biggest immigrant community is in the U.S., and of course we have a lot from the U.S. And when the president sent that message, that started to call people's attention in order to see, like, what is he proposing arriving in this car? What is the message behind? Is he saying that he's going to fix the law of importing electric vehicles, for instance, is he given a true lineup in the financial architecture to scale down the funds that they get from the tax on gas to be implemented in environmental projects. So it came with a lot of questions. Then, 4 months after that, he chaired the first meeting in 15 years of the National Council of Climate Change, of ministers. So he sit together all the ministers, and he told them, we need to establish a target until 2050, and we need to be carbon neutral by then. I think even when he was saying it, he was a little shocked, but he said it. And that's an important message, because you have one of the biggest businessmen of the Dominican Republic, probably one of the richest of the Dominican Republic, that his business was tourism, like his family main business was tourism, telling like their cabinet that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. Then the Dominican Republic published an NDC establishing that 5% of the money that we need to achieve our carbon emissions goal in reductions and our compromise to the Paris Agreement was needed to come from the private sector of the Dominican Republic, meaning that the government need to back up like the enabling environment for that type of investment. And that 2% of what we needed, it was going to come from the government. So that change, you know, it's leading the way for the private sector to start to thinking on how make the switch and back up the global and regional leadership, because the leadership has two phases. One phase is the diplomatic phase, that I can be perfect in diplomatic relations but have a mess of a country, and then you have the real investment of the private sector in what we need to do. And that's why we hosted the Latin American Climate Week in the Dominican Republic, and we put into the center of the Latin American Climate Week our private sector. What we were showcasing was private sector, like the cement companies, like the energy initiative of the government of the United States, the methane pledge, and how everything is coming together from that political willingness and the mandates that we have. But also, we have a robust scheme. We are very good at making laws. So right now, we need to switch and being good to implement that enabling environment, and I think that's more or less the way we've been through in order to become that. There's a long journey still. One of the vice ministers of coastal marine management of the Department of Environment has a campaign right now which is called Zero Foam, plastic foam. And it's not political, it's personal. He doesn't want to make it a political thing, but at the same time, he's hosting a political, position. So if you are telling like your people, we are not having foam and I need to protect the species and the coastal marine ecosystem from plastic, from waste, then that's the whole circle. At the end, if you are in a regulator position, you need to be careful. But since our law is very open, the Ministry of Environment, the Department of Environment, implements international cooperation projects, regulates in another part, and also oversees the policy. So it's complicated, but at the same time has a lot of benefits in order to achieve all these goals.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nathalie. Edwin, I'm wondering if you can speak on the role of the energy sector then in mobilizing carbon financing to tackle these challenges to help support these innovative solutions we've discussed. And then I'm also wondering if you could touch on a bit how that functions within, dynamic regulatory frameworks in different areas. I think Nathalie really showcased how the regulation, how the public policy plays a role in this. And I know the energy sector obviously has to work within that framework as well. So how does that all function?
Yeah, I can probably speak more broadly, like it's the energy sector, but I think it's like the sector, I mean, I don't know, I would say it's like industry almost as a whole, right? Like thinking about it again from the Canadian perspective, and thinking about making investments in Canada versus the US. So I think one of the big things that we do is obviously work through industry associations. I think that's a really big piece of it. And I know like the cement industry, for example, I know they've done a lot of advocacy with the federal government in Canada around, carbon credits and this whole notion of regulatory uncertainty and price uncertainty. So one of the things that we're looking forward to coming out in the spring budget in Canada next week is hopefully more clarity around carbon contracts for difference. So that's something that they have in Europe, and hopefully something that we can adopt in Canada as well. So basically what that is, if you're not familiar, so I was kind of talking earlier about compliance markets in terms of offsets generations and whatnot. So thinking about Alberta, where I'm based, we have a output-based pricing system. It's called TIER, so Technology, Innovation, Emissions Reduction Regulation. So basically, it's performance-based, so you got a benchmark. If you're able to, reduce your emissions below the benchmark, you generate credits, but then also there's a number of opportunities like around quantification protocols like CCUS, for example, where you're also able to generate credits through that. But the challenge there is between supply and demand. So the expectation is that in Alberta, for example, a large number of oil sands producers are going to be adopting CCS and going to basically flood the market, right? And driving down the costs. So for early movers like ourselves, so we're partnered with Capital Power, which is a natural gas-fired generation facility, and then Lehigh Cement. So they're also looking at using CCS at their facility to produce, that low CI cement. So, and Enbridge is involved there, so we're providing the transportation infrastructure, so basically the pipeline between those two facilities, and then to the actual injection well, so the storage piece of it. But one of the big hindrances to us being able to invest, but also Capital Power and Lehigh as well, is this whole notion around environmental attributes and selling of the carbon credits. So what the federal government has proposed is a carbon contract for difference. So basically what you do there is you set a strike price. So if you think that CCUS is economic at say $90 a ton, for example, a third party not from the government, but in order to kind of avoid that stroke of the pen risk, it's basically a third party comes and backs a contract that says if the carbon price falls below this particular price, they'll pay the difference between that price and your strike price. But if you're above that particular strike price, then Capital or Lehigh or ourselves would have to pay that third party the difference. So again, if the carbon price is like $120, we would be paying like $30 a ton back to, But basically what it does is it really reduces the risk for the first few early movers, right? And I think that's what's key to being able to bring things like CCS or green hydrogen or other things to scale, right? And I think that's the whole thing. And I think one of the challenges that governments see is like, well, we're providing ITCs and we're providing funding, all that kind of stuff, but really that provides the capital. It doesn't provide the operating, which is more of a cost there. So I don't think it's necessarily just the energy sector. I think it's kind of everybody across the board because we have to decarbonize things, everywhere, right? And yeah, that whole jurisdiction piece you were talking about, I kind of talked about it earlier, but even in thinking about the U.S., for example, like renewable natural gas, we've acquired a few renewable natural gas company or like generators, but then also partnering with some other ones as well. And when we think about that market, I know what I've heard from like business development folks is that they'd rather in the U.S. invest in the VCM market, the voluntary climate market. So if you're going to have renewable natural gas, it's better off having like a PPA structure with like a Duke Energy, for example, or someone else who wants to reduce their Scope 1 emissions, because then over a 10-year period, you've kind of got a fixed volume, you've got a fixed price on your environmental attributes, versus selling those credits into like, no offense to California, but the LCFS, for example, like I think if you look at the trend line, the cost of LCFS credits has obviously gone down, and I think that's a good thing. I think I heard yesterday it's because things are actually at scale and they're cheaper to make, right? But as an investor, like you'd want to invest in something that's kind of more stable, right? Which I thought was really interesting. Just thinking, I thought you'd always want to invest in the compliance market, but in this particular situation, the VCM is actually optimal. So I think it's totally jurisdictional based. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's unique solutions
Yeah, totally.
to each unique condition. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Great. Well, I think there's about 8 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up to questions. I already see a hand. Thank you so much. Abby, if you want to pass the mic. We do need to speak into the mic because this session is recorded, and we want to get the question. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Devki. I'm with ACR. So I have a question, and I'll give a brief background about. So in the past century, we know that the developed nations, they have built their housing infrastructure, roads, dams, and they have already released their fair share of emissions without any carbon tax. But like, if you look at the developing nations, like India, for example, we are a developing nation, as in there is going to be a lot of construction happening, housing for all, construction, roads, dams, bridges, and industrialization. So China is the largest producer of cement in the world, and they are also the largest consumer because they were industrializing and they were building all these infrastructure. Whereas industrial migration is said to happen to India, and also all of these additional infrastructure policies that will spike a demand at least 3 to 6 times, and India will be soon the largest producer of cement. But it also comes with challenges, like for example, like when there's global warming happening, the coastal areas in India and the poor in India get affected the most. And currently there's no carbon tax in India. Like there's a coal tax, but there's no like carbon tax. It doesn't participate in it. But when there is one, it will be very challenging, like who's going to pay for the premium price, right? Like you mentioned the green hydrogen, like who's going to pay for the green cement? And when there's a lot of development happening, you can't afford to pay a lot of money. Because the Western world has already released a ton of emissions, we expect, like the developing nations expect that the Western world supports the developing nations, because now, like it's our share of releasing carbon dioxide and but you understand the concept. So my question is, when we have the carbon offsets, you still need some upfront investment. Like for example, if you were to install more waste heat recovery systems in the clinkerization process, or you're using carbon capture and storage, you still need upfront investments. And that is something that developing nations struggle. And the cost of capital is high as well, unlike Western nations where you can easily have access to funds, you can raise capital. And what we are seeing or foreseeing is a lot of foreign investment in these developing nations, like India in particular, that will throw away the local cement industries. They will get acquired by foreign companies and so on. So how do you propose that to help with the capital investments for these companies, the upfront capital investments? Like I know offsets, you get the money when you're done with the project, you're selling them, and so on. So how do you propose that the Western nations help these developing nations? Yeah, that's my question.
Awesome question. Thank you so much.
I think either of us might be able to, I guess I can
Yeah,
start.
if you
Yeah.
want.
Go for it, Lauren.
So with the appropriate signal that the carbon offset, we can create it and we can sell it. ClimeCo is a company that would invest, and we are considering foreign investments to provide that upfront financing to solve that exact problem, right? You can't generate offsets without some money first, and it's a difficult market to invest in. I don't know if you attended the panel prior to this talking about the investment, but a lot of your classic banks, your institutional investors are very uncomfortable with the carbon market. So I think the money exists, and I think having stronger price signals in the VCM will continue to bring the money in. But right now it's still a little early.
I don't know, I think you answered it succinctly.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Right on. Any other questions from the audience? No takers? Okay, then I think I'm gonna shout out give one more question to the group here. I think we talked about a lot of different challenges here and some really fantastic potential solutions and things we need. We need robust public policy. We need the rules and the regulations to be there, and a supportive way to the private sector to really engage with the private sector. So it's private sector will coupled with political will. We have to have that. Potentially, we also need to really consider the specific conditions of the jurisdictions. We need to have early movers and ways to reduce the risk, perhaps unique dynamic pricing structures. What do we think can be done? Like, what do we want to see in the next year? The next year, do we think this is, where is this possible? These are all, I think those are all really challenging, big things. Like, I don't see any of that as easy. So what can we hope for by next NACW as far as making some movement here?
You're gonna make me go first?
Yeah. Well, anyone. I mean,
Okay, I can.
okay, Nathalie.
Okay, so since I will try to see it as, you know, citizen of the world, but also involved in the government and private sector, whatever. I think we need in a year, in the next conference that you guys organized, we need bankers here in the conversation for them to understand the challenges that project developers and the communities and you know, the people that are in charge to actually make their reports of how a certain project is actually affecting or not the emissions trending of anyone. Because at the end, I can have the money, you can have the money, but if you don't have the right pathway for the investment, then where are you going? Like we've been facing with investment from the Green Climate Fund, perhaps, that it's a big fund that was created to develop projects, to reduce emission, to help adaptation, and it has been facing a lot of challenges because the money doesn't flow, or the money goes to a specific region because those countries demand a special treatment just because they are this or that, which is a challenge that we are facing in Latin America when we are fighting for projects approval with African countries, just to put as an example. And then you have the Europeans that have an issue because they have basically an eternal debt with African countries, and then Europeans pitching for African countries, and then the other countries, you know, a little alone.
Yeah.
A lot of money flowing for readiness projects that at the end get forgotten when the readiness project finishes, because we don't have that investment that countries, businesses, and everyone actually need.
Yeah.
And then the challenge itself of the accreditation of banks, development banks, in this kind of development funds of projects. So I don't want to mention any bank specifically, but I've been following up different banks of North America and their sustainability vice presidents or heads or whatever, and how they are deploying investment. We know that they are still investing on fossil fuels, but little by little they are changing. And that pitch, I think, is the one that we need to have, and have them in the conversation on how the line of credits need to have this kind of taxonomy. And that's why countries like Colombia or Chile or even the Dominican Republic, that is working in its green taxonomy right now, are in this topic are a little, you know, people are interested in investing over there because of that. It's because when the bank has the line credit for a certain taxonomy, you can achieve that.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
That's something that we can do from now to a year, and have them in the table would be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So get the money in the room. Well, I think Nathalie actually saved you both, because I think she did such a good job. And we're at time now, so. Lauren's like, oh, thank God.
Well,
There is a very succinct thing that anyone
I'll
would.
say it really, can I be really succinct?
Yeah.
Okay, totally unrelated, but I think it's permitting reform. I think there's so many projects that need to go ahead, but there's this permitting issue that
Oh,
needs
yeah.
to be resolved in the US and Canada in order for this stuff to go forward. That's
Without
it.
a doubt.
I wrote down financial certainty, price signals, and enabling policy. So, yeah, maybe that's a pipe dream,
All
but
connected.
maybe
Perfect.
I'll take one.
All right, so next NACW, we're going to check those boxes.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks.